Hey guys, today we're going to talk about two-dimensional arrays. Two-dimensional arrays are essentially a collection of arrays. So if you think about a grid is a great thing to think about when you think about two-dimensional arrays. And looking at this grid here, this is a two-dimensional array. It's a collection of lists. So here I have one array on top, then I have another array, and then I have another array. So essentially I have a list, another list, another list, and we can control how big this two-dimensional array is. So we can control how many arrays that there are, and I can also control how big each of those arrays are. And so here's how we do that. If I wanted to initialize this two-dimensional array, this is what it would look like. The 3, that first number, is how many arrays we want. If I want 3 arrays, I'll put a 3 there. If I want 5, I'll put a 5 there. The 4 is how big I want each of those arrays to be, or how many elements I want each of them to be able to hold. And there's a reason that I made these not the same, that I made this a rectangle instead of a square. Because I could very well just make it a 4 by 4 and we get a square, but I made it a 3 on purpose, and I'll show you why here in a minute. So the indexing with the 2D array works very similar to how coordinates work. So like x's and y's on a coordinate grid. So the first array is the first array, but it's index 0, right? We always start at 0, so we call it array 0. And if I'm going to progress through that array, I'm going to say that the first element in it is 0, 0. The next element in that array is 0, 1, 0, 2, and 0, 3. When I go to the second array, that's going to be array 1, right? Because we start at 0, right? It's the second array. And its indexing is going to be 1, 0, 1, 1, and so on. So if you want to think of these as rows and columns, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to show you both ways that you're going to see this. But we can think of each coordinate as a row and a column. So this would be row 0, column 0, row 0, column 1, row 0, column 2. If you want to think of it in those terms, that's perfectly fine. You'll actually see it set up with the words row and column, or row and col, a lot, and so that's okay. And like I said, the first index is the array that we're on. The next index is the element in the array that you want to reference. Okay, so if I set it up like this is simply declaring the array. So I need to come back later and initialize each of those elements with some data. And here's a way that I can do that. So almost exactly like how we would do it with a 1D array. So here's how that would look here. We're not going to do it like this a lot. We're not going to hard code these values in here a lot, but you need to know what it looks like. So, we're going to be taking data from the user. We're going to be taking data from files. So there's not going to be a whole lot of times we're going to do it like this. But the same referencing happens here. So we have index 0, 0. 0, 0 is the first element in that array. 0, 1, we set it to a 2. 0, 2, set it to a 3, and so on. I'm going to go ahead and show you. So this is how it would look like if I want to just hard code it, right? I'm going to go ahead and show you how we would do this if we already knew what the data was going to be. So if we're going to take the data from file, this is exactly how we would set this up. If we already knew the data, though, here's how that would look. And I'm going to jump a little bit ahead. It's going to look like this. And I'm going to take this out because this will look a whole lot better. Okay. And this allows us to see a whole lot better that this is literally a list of lists. So here I have the first array that's in this 2D array. Here I have the second array. And then here I have the third list that's in this array. So they're all contained within curly brackets, and they're all separated by their own comma. So it gets a little crazy, trying to make sure you got all those curly brackets and all those commas. But it's easy to see what's what. Now, like I said, you can think of this in terms of, or picture in your head as a grid, right? So if I plug in all this data, this is what my grid's actually looking like at this point. The first array has the values 1, 2, 3, 4. second array 5, 6, 7, 8. So if you want to picture this in your head like that, and a good trick to do, sometimes I do this, is I'll bump this down to a new line and line them up like this. And that just helps me as the coder, the developer. I can better visualize like where that data is inside the array. So if you want to do that, that's just a little trick you can do so that you can easily visualize what that array looks like. You don't have to do that. You could easily just put it all on one line, and that's fine. Okay. So now let's talk about how we're going to process this array, how we're going to access these values. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in a for loop here. Remember this little trick in Eclipse? I can do for control space and hit the down arrow, and it'll try to use index on an array and give me the loop, the for loop header that I want. Sometimes it works, sometimes it gets the values wrong, but it's a good little quick trick there. So let's talk about what this is. So AR.length. When we are dealing with 1D arrays, AR.length gives us the length of that array, right? It doesn't work like that, exactly like that with 2D arrays. 2D arrays, AR.length gets me the length of the 2D array. So essentially it brings me back how many arrays there are in the 2D array. In this case, there's 3. So in this case, AR.length is going to shoot me back a 3. Okay, and so let me show you why that's important. Let's try to print out some of these values. If I wanted to print out the first value in this array, I would do so like this, 0, 0, right? If I want to loop through that entire first array here, that is array 0, remember, it's the first one, and then I'm going to go through each index. So I want this number to stay the same. I want it to be a static 0. I want to stick to that first array. This one I want to update. I want that one to change. I want it to go through that first array. So I'm going to use I here. Okay. Let's see what happens. I get 1, 2, 3. That's not right. I'm missing the 4. It did not iterate enough. Why not? Well, we said why not. Because AR.length is getting me the amount of arrays that are there, which is a 3. So that I is only counting 0, 1, 2. I need it to count one more time so I can get all the values. Here's how we do that. So AR.length again gets us how many arrays there are. That's 3. If I want, and that does not match the length of each array. The length of each array is a 4. So in order to get that 4, here's how we do that. We attach a 0 here. Now we could easily do a 1 or we could do a 2, but here's what this means. AR0.length is going to bring me the length of that array, which is a 4 in this case. And if I hit play, that gives me enough iterations. Now because all of these arrays are all 4 in length, I could put a 1 here or a 2 and it would still work because they all have the same length. But I can't just leave it as AR.length because they're not 3, right? If this were a square, this would work just fine. So if I took these out, now I have 3 arrays that are all 3 in length, and AR.length will work just fine. But I'm kind of cheating the system when I do that. So I said that I made these not a square on purpose, and that's why, because I wanted you to see that this wouldn't work. So what if I wanted to print everything in this 2D array, all of them? Here's how that would work. I'm going to have to iterate enough times to go through all the arrays, and I want to iterate enough times to go through each of them. So we're going to have to use a nested loop here. Notice that still worked. It changed it to a J, so I could use that. I'm going to change that to an I, and I'm going to change this to a J, and let's talk about what happens here. And I'm going to do this, and we'll talk about that too. So AR.length, remember, that gives me a 3. That's how many lists there are, how many arrays there are in the 2D array. AR0.length is going to give me a 4. The 4 is the length of each of the arrays, which is 4. Okay, so here's how this works. Remember back to the clock when we learned how to do nested loops. This works the exact same way. So the first time through, the first iteration, I is going to be a 0. It's going to stay static at a 0. The j, though, is going to count 0, 1, 2, 3. So this will change from 0, 1, 2, 3. This will be a 0, and then this will change 0, 1, 2, 3. Then it pops back up to the outer loop. This updates to a 1. This resets to a 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. It pops back up. I get a 2, 0, 2, 1. This idea worked better in my head. 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3. Okay, and so we put the I and the J back in here, and we'll see what prints out. I get the entire 2D array printed out. If I wanted to format this a little bit better, I could do it like this. Can make that a print. I think if I do this, maybe add a little space in here, like that, space it out. Now I can clearly see my grid, right? Just by doing a little bit of formatting. So that's how that works. This is your basic, like, anytime we want to print out a 2D array, this is what we're doing. We're doing a nested loop. We're controlling how many arrays that we have, and we're controlling how many elements are in each of those arrays. Now let me show you real quick another way you can do this. We're going to end up making a tic-tac-toe game later, so we're really going to be dealing with a grid at some point, and you'll also see this on the AP exam sometimes. This outer loop is actually controlling the rows, and so I can call this row, and then I like to call this call for column. You'll see IJ a lot, but you'll also see row call sometimes when you're dealing with like games and stuff, and you're really dealing with rows and columns. And so this one, the outer loop, is dealing with what row that we're on. So it's going to be row 0, row 1, and row 2. The inner one is going to iterate through all of the columns. So the columns in each row. So it's going to count column 0, column 1, column 2, column 3, and then go to the next one, and so on and so on. So I don't care which one you use, if you use IJ or if you use row call. It doesn't matter to me. It's not going to bother me. You'll see it both ways, though, is what I want you to understand. On the AP exam, you'll see it both ways. On FRQs, both ways. In the book, both ways. So I don't care which one you use, and I'll even go back and forth on which one that I use.